Poolesville is a small community, about 6,000 people. It's in the middle of a 93,000 acre ag reserve in Montgomery County, Maryland. I'm the town manager of Poolesville, Maryland. So in October of 22, MDE sent out a letter stating that they had done some testing and PFAS in 2 of our wells was elevated enough that we needed to send out a public notice.
My name is Tim Whitehouse. I'm a resident in Poolesville, Maryland. I first became interested in PFAS through my work as Executive Director of Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. We work with public employees throughout the country who have environmental concerns. And one issue they kept coming to us with was this class of chemicals called PFAS. This is a class of chemicals with a strong carbon-fluorine bond that are believed to be highly toxic. And we were testing waters in Florida, in Massachusetts, and many other states and finding high levels of this class of chemicals called PFAS. I was thinking, I wonder what my water is in terms of contamination with PFAS. Does my water have PFAS in it? And if so, at what levels? And so in September of 2020, I tested my water and we found fairly high levels of PFAS, not crazy high, but to put it in perspective, we found 4 parts per trillion, just below 4 parts per trillion of one PFAS called PFOA, and we also found just below 4 parts per trillion of another PFAS called PFOS. And we notified the town of Poolesville, and EPA at that time didn't have a drinking water standard, so while any PFAS we believe is harmful to human health, there was no standard to say that is a dangerous level, it shouldn't be in there. And so I kind of sat tight on that and didn't do much with it in terms of my own drinking water. And I was very glad to find that when Poolesville had tested their own wells, that when they did find 2 of the wells had really high levels of PFAS, that they shut those wells down. Poolesville, because it's in the middle of an agricultural reserve, the town itself gets its water supply from the aquifer. But many of the people that live outside of town have private wells. They have their own wells and they draw their water from the same aquifer as Poolesville. But there's no testing of the water and people don't know whether their water is contaminated. So we've conducted 8 tests in different homes around Poolesville to see what their levels of PFAS are. That will help determine how contaminated the aquifer actually is and where that contamination is, and whether these people need to get filters in their own drinking water.
My name's Ellen Gordon. I live here with my husband, Jim Ballard. We've been here about 38 years, raised our kids here, raised a lot of animals here. We have horses and dogs and chickens for their eggs. And I garden extensively here and grew concerned recently about PFAS and PFOS contaminating water and soil. So we live here in the ag reserve. We're on well and septic, so we have our own individual well, which is drilled down about 400 feet. And that's exclusively where we get the water for the house and the water for the barn. Well, I know there's concerns. I have health concerns, nothing specific. I have a lot of friends with autoimmune disorders. It runs in my family, and it's always difficult from an epidemiology standpoint to pinpoint sources for things like that. But I have to believe that, or I personally believe from the reading that I have done, that there could be a multiplicity of things that play, in genetics as well, but in the environment, that play into the development of autoimmune issues. And I just wonder if the prevalence of PFAS is one of those factors, and it concerns me. I worry about what we're going to do if we find out that our water's contaminated. I mean, I know there are systems you can put on at least under your sink, if not your house, and we'd certainly do at least under our kitchen sink, which is where we get a lot of our water from. Where does that leave our animals? And if we use our water, I water things. In really dry weather, I will water our veg garden and eat a lot of what comes out of our veg garden. And we eat our chickens' eggs. So then I have to start worrying about, okay, what about the water that that I give to our chickens. So we've discussed it, but kind of left it aside. My husband and I have discussed it, but kind of have left it aside for, oh, let's find out when we test our water.
We're testing for 18 PFAS. I think they said 36 or 70, but we switched the test so we could do the EPA methodology so that they wouldn't argue with us. Although the non-EPA methodology will get you 36 or 70, but it's almost identical.
Huh, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, just talking to the lab and the new EPA drinking water standards that are proposed. We probably go with a lower amount, but more quality control.
Mm-hmm.
So how long do you expect? I know that
They normally take a couple weeks, but I think probably they're supposed to do it within 28 days under their own lab standards. I imagine they're busy. It seems to be something that everyone's testing for.
It's in the news.
Yeah, it's in the news a lot lately.
I know that we've mentioned it in passing with different friends, and everybody's like, okay, where am I going to get my water tested? That's what I've said to you, is that there are a lot of people out there that do want to have their water tested.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully by doing these well testings, I think we're doing 8. We'll get to see whether there's just a general problem. Right. And then if there is, I would hope the county or state would start really trying to figure out what the source of it is. So to show you how silly EPA is, everyone laughs behind your back. So they're don't put this in.
All right.
Film it. So EPA develops methodologies for testing water, and one of the things is you need to preserve your sample, right? So that makes sense. And so with their methodology for 18, they have a preservative in there. But you actually don't need the preservative because it's a forever chemical, right? So it doesn't break down. Unlike other things you may be testing for, in 28 days it's not going to break down. So we tested prior, we tested Poolesville water, tested Chevy Chase water 3 or 4 years ago, and we tested for 36, and it's exactly the same thing, only there's no little preservative at the bottom. So WSSC was like, you didn't use the EPA methodology. We were like, all right, EPA uses its lab. And EPA has no methodology for 36 PFAS. They have none. So anyways, I talked to the lab a long time, and they just said you're better off doing this because they're testing for the main ones. And if the main ones are here, PFO and PFOS, Gen X are here, there's going to be other kinds too.
I know it was a big scare for the community when we first put out the notice. And I think that being as transparent as possible and letting them know what we're going to do about it. We brought a hydrologist in. We did a public presentation. There's actually some community members also that are very well versed in PFAS, and they lent a hand. And I've talked to them offline several occasions. I try to surround myself with the scientists and hydrologists and engineers to bring resolve to this problem, and we are working towards it and working with MDE. And MDE actually is not struggling, but they're having a difficult time figuring out what the next steps are going to be. And I think you're going to see Poolesville as one of the leaders in the state to put treatment systems on their water systems. So that's going to be an exciting time for Poolesville.
The town of Poolesville has responded very well to the PFAS contamination in its wells. I really appreciate the fact that the town was open and transparent, that they notified the town residents of the contamination, that they took immediate steps to shut down the 2 wells that had very high levels of PFAS, and that they're continuing to test their water. They've also been very transparent and open to residents' concerns. They held a town meeting. I thought they did an excellent job presenting the risks and harms from PFAS to community members. They didn't try and hide anything, and they're just been very, very open and honest. I think it's a model for how local government should respond. This is a really hard issue for local governments. They are not responsible for this contamination. It's very difficult problem to solve when they do find contamination. And they are kind of stuck because they have been given a problem and it costs a lot of money to clean it up. It's not their fault, but they're left footing the bill. And I hope the town of Poolesville and other communities really consider suing the responsible parties, the chemical manufacturers, who have allowed these chemicals onto the market, knowing the great risk they pose to all of us.